The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Herkese merhabalar. Bir iki dakika içinde başlayacağız. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Kullanıcı hesapları ve bu hesapların erişimleri, bu erişimlerin yönetimi her zaman önemliydi. Malumunuz bu son süreçte bunun önemi bir kat daha arttı. Bugünkü konumuz IDM, IAM, Multi-Factor Authentication, sair konular. Yani kullanıcı hesapları ve bunun yönetilmesi etrafında Okta'nın sunmuş olduğu çözümler. Bugün ana sunumu Okta teknolojiden Max Faun yapacak. Ben Osman Keleş, Sentra Bilişim Satış Direktörüyüm. Akışımız şu şekilde. Ben 5-6 dakikalık kısa bir Sentra sunumu yapacağım. Sonra sözü Max'a bırakacağım. Bir 30-35 dakika belki 40 dakika Max bir sunum yapacak Okta ile ilgili. Sonrasında soru cevap kısmına geçeceğiz. Sizlerden gelecek soruları cevaplayacağız. Sonrasında kapatacağız. Şunu söylemek isterim. Bu webinarın kaydedilecek bu webinar ve sonrasında zannediyorum en geç yarın Sentra'nın kurumsal YouTube kanalında yayınlanıyor olacak. Oradan tekrarını dinleyebileceksiniz. Şimdi ben kısaca Sentra'dan bahsedeyim. Sentra Bilişim 2012 yılında kurulmuş. Veri güvenliği, mobil güvenlik ve iş çözümlerinde dikey uzmanlığı olan bir şirket. Ankara'da ve İstanbul'da, ana ofisimiz İstanbul, Ankara'da ofisimiz var. İki şehirde faaliyet gösteriyoruz. Dediğim gibi 3 ana alanda çözüm sunuyoruz müşterilerimize. Bunlardan birincisi veri güvenliği ve veri koruma çözümleri. Burada verinin keşfedilmesi, verinin sınıflandırılması, maskelenmesi, şifrelenmesi, zamanı geçen, işi biten verinin yasal eğer zorunluluk var ise bunun geri dönüşümsüz silinmesi, veri erişim yönetimi, Data Access Governance, bu verinin sızmasının önlenmesi, DLP ve CASB çözümleri, oluşan tüm logların, sistemde oluşan logların merkezi bir yerde toplanması, CM çözümleri, bugünkü konumuz olan IDM, IAM çözümü, phishing simülasyonu, uzaktan webinar, toplantı, eğitim çözümleri, uzaktan eğitim, learning management sistem çözümleri, fiziksel alan güvenliği ve collaboration çözümleri. İkinci alanımız mobil güvenlik. Malumunuz bu son süreçte bunun önemi de birkaç kat daha arttı ve artık müşteriler bunun ihtiyacını daha çok hissetmeye başladı. Burada da Mobile Device Management, MDM, Mobile Application Management, EMM ve bunların tamamının artık tek ismi olan Unified Endpoint Management çözümleri, VDI, mobil güvenlik tehdit yönetimi, VPN, trafik optimizasyonu ve e-mail, Total Email Security çözümleri. İlk çözümlerimizde uçtan uca kampüs çözümleri. Yani bir üniversite kampüsünün A'dan Z'ye tüm IT ihtiyaçların belirlenmesi, bunların tedarik edilmesi, bunların hayata geçirilmesi ve bu projenin yönetilmesi çözümü. Danışmanlık, KVKK, KVM Switch ve Mac Mobile Conversation çözümleri buradaki ilk çözümlerimiz. Şimdi bu çözümleri hangi ürünlerle yapıyoruz? Kısaca onları söyleyelim. Verinin keşfi, şifrelenmesi, maskelenmesi tarafında MicroFocus, DLP Kezbi tarafında ForcePoint, Mobile Threat Management'ta Lookout, verinin güvenli silinmesinde Blanco, bugünkü konumuz olan IDM tarafında Okta, MDM-MAM Unified Endpoint tarafında ve VDI'da Citrix ve AirWatch, Data Access Governanceda Stealthbits, e-mail simülasyonu ve Total Email Security, toplam e-mail güvenliğinde Barracuda, KVKK süreç yönetiminde Kibele, fiziksel alan yönetiminde Impixon, veri sınıflandırmada Titus ve Bolden James, VPN ve hat optimizasyonunda NetMotion, uzaktan webinar, eğitim ve toplantı için LogMeIn ve malum bir kısım çalışanlar artık uzaktan çalışıyor. Pandemi döneminde, yoğun olduğu dönemde daha çoktu ama süreç normale dönse bile bu yeni normalde muhtemeldir ki birçok firma bir kısım çalışanlarını uzaktan çalıştırmaya devam edecek. Burada da bu çalışanların performansının ölçülmesi ve yönetilmesi konusu var. Burada da Berkun'la çözüm üretiyoruz. Son olarak hangi müşterilerimiz var? Bir kısmını en azından göstermiş olalım. Genel itibariyle enterprise müşterilerde çözüm üretiyoruz. Bunlar da bizim müşterilerimizden bir kısmı. Şimdi sunumunu yapmak üzere Max'a devredeceğim. Max, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Thank you very much for joining us, Max. IDM and EM is an important issue, especially in pandemic era. Please make your presentation, how Okta handled this and how Okta differs about this. Your turn.
Yeah, sure. I'm just sharing my webcam, so hopefully everyone can see me. Good morning, everyone. Well, actually, it might be good afternoon for you. I'm not sure what time of day this is being watched at. By way of introduction, my name is Max Horn. I lead Okta's value consulting practice here in EMEA. What that is it's an in-house, so an internal management consultancy, systems integrator advisory, and hopefully that's all I'm actually intending to say about myself or Okta. I'm keen to talk about zero trust and security and not plug our products. So, and on that, zero trust is a strategy, not a product. I think that we see a lot of slapping zero trust as a brand on top of the same old thing. Doesn't really make a difference. The marketeers of the world have jumped on zero trust. And I'm sure that some in this room, in this call, shall we say, will think that zero trust is a buzzword. It's not. Hopefully by the end of the talk, I'll have changed a few minds. So I'm going to give a keynote speech to introduce the concepts we're here today to discuss. I'll talk about how security has evolved through recent time, through our careers. I'll talk about what we can do to address new challenges. I found this to be very helpful. I'm then going to do a bit of a Q&A for anyone who has questions, so please save them till the end and I will get to them. So to begin, we used to architect networks fundamentally differently. It was very focused on the concept of a hard outer shell. Basically, you had the internet, then you had a perimeter firewall, then you had web servers, app servers, then you would have an internal firewall, back-end application servers, database servers, and other things. And this worked for a while. No computer could physically connect to our network unless we plugged it in. And I'm sure everyone remembers those days, and you have to actually plug in your computer to get onto the internet. What that meant was, if you were within this network, if you were within this trusted network, you were trusted. And that made sense for a while. But all it would have taken would have been one bad actor. If you think about this from a government, a military, or even an espionage, a spying perspective, it's kind of fun. Essentially, for a long time, they were very focused on physically getting past receptionists so they could plug into networks and see what was on the inside. And I know this anecdotally because some of those people now work for Okta. I think this got a hell of a lot easier once Wi-Fi was created, because you didn't need to get into the building anymore. You didn't need to sneak past a receptionist. You could just park outside and access the Wi-Fi, as often it wasn't configured properly. So I remember working at a defense company, a defense firm that actually has quite a successful cybersecurity business. And we physically had to plug in. There was no Wi-Fi. It was the sort of thing where mobile phones, you know, first you didn't really get one if you worked there unless you were very senior, but they were left in a bucket outside of every door. So it was very much that way of thinking, you know, the hard outer shell. But to illustrate my point in a more mundane way, I was once on site, think of a large industrial campus, a large industrial area. Gaining access to the site was very normal. I had a pass, it was visually checked, so there's no barcode, no chip, no QR scan. It was just, here I am. I was very worn out as well, so you could barely see my face. And I had to go into a warehouse because I was working on something in the deployed energy space. So we were parachuting in kind of generators to refugee camps. That was the work we were working on. And I had to get into the warehouse to test this system just to make sure it was all running. I couldn't get in because someone had put down a load of pallets, boxes outside the front door. So I went to the next warehouse because I knew that there was a walkway between the two. And I knocked on the door and I was let in. That was interesting. Just by virtue of me being on the campus, on the site, I was allowed into this room. I walked in and I saw 5 houses, so 5 houses, side to side, inside a warehouse. Why would we have built 5 buildings, full buildings, windows, gardens, everything, inside of a warehouse? Well, I can't say this with 100%, you know, conviction, but I'm 99% sure that that was the MI6, the security training bug house, where they train agents to break into buildings and place bugs or to do surveillance. So I'd heard rumors that that was on this campus, and obviously this was not somewhere I was supposed to be. I definitely shouldn't have been in that room. You know, even if I had the appropriate level of security clearance, there is also the principle, which some people on this call may be familiar with, of least privilege principle, that you should only see the things that you need to see when you need to see them. It's part of zero trust. So just that front gate level of security was not enough, nowhere near enough. No one verified I specifically needed access to this thing. My identity hadn't been checked. And if it had, if that identity had have been checked, it would have been just an ID card. You know, that's not enough. That, how do you really know that is who it is? That very same credential, right? It's not secure. So this analogy, this example, is not unlike the simple credential of a username and a password, where you use your username and a password and you access a network, and once you're in, because that password is not the same one you've used 200 times to log onto a Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. Now think about that for a second. By extension, you know, your coffee shop's security against hackers is now in question as it affects your business security. If they get compromised, which they are, which everyone is, to be fair, and there are large sets of usernames and passwords, large credential sets on the dark web that you can buy, you know, you can have a lot of fun with those. If they get compromised, your last name dot first name or first name dot last name, your password, perhaps even your home address and your telephone number. They're all out there, and people buy up these data sets and then they use them for password spraying attacks or even social engineering, which is much harder to counter. And so once you're in with those credentials, you can go places you've got no need to go. There are no policies around what you should be able to access based on who you are. So back then, the world was actually quite simple. It was just an app sitting on top of a server. But then the cloud came about, you know, and people on this call are probably familiar with Salesforce, O365, Box, Slack, Zoom, G Suite, and they took core confidential data, sensitive data, and they moved it outside of the firewall. If we'd said 20 years ago that your core strategic infrastructure, you know, your documents, your sales data, all of this would be outside of your network and outside of your control, it's not that no one would have believed us. We would have been laughed at. It's just, honestly, what are you on about? That will never happen. I think it happened, well, it has happened. I think it happened because there is an acceptance, there is an understanding that other people can do certain things better than us. You know, sometimes you need to focus on what your business strategy is and not on some of the back-end tech that supports it. So the iPhone came along and that created another change. So we've had the cloud and now we've got the iPhone. It showed us that technology can be easy, can be fun, it can be attractive, it can be the thing you actually want to use. By way of example, how many times today have the people on this call pulled out your phone without having a notification to look at sports, stocks, news, you know, these things? Technology has become an integral part of our lives. Back in 2007, BlackBerry was the #1 device on the market with 96% market share. The iPhone came out and they put out a phone with no buttons. Technically, it had one button, the home button, but we'll leave that for a second. Put out a phone with no buttons, and it showed technology could be far easier and more fun. I believe BlackBerry was sold in insolvency and bankruptcy a couple of years ago, and it makes the point that I'm trying to make, which is if we're not making things faster and easier to use, we'll fall behind. And when we consider the iPhone, it's also worth noting what it can't do. You know, its battery, its screen size, its processing power, they're limited. And how do we improve these? Well, the only way you can really improve them is by buying a new iPhone. Every year or every 2 years, you know, they do the refresh cycle and we all run out to spend $1,000 or whatever on a new iPhone or a new Samsung or whatever it is. Your iPhone isn't, or your phone isn't suitable for doing a lot of stuff, but it can connect to something much bigger. This is the API economy. So it can run these complex tasks back in the cloud with effectively unlimited processing power, unlimited storage, unlimited battery. Something like routing you from A to B, so Google Maps, Apple Maps, if you're a lunatic and you still use Apple Maps, something like routing you from A to B is mathematically a very intensive process. If you were to run that process on your phone, you would actually drain your battery really, really quickly. So we do it in the cloud instead, and we use APIs to communicate. So we've moved our workload from our endpoint devices to servers in the cloud. So now we have APIs running on servers, powering things with applications on top and devices on top of that. Instead of the cloud simplifying things, we've actually made it vastly more complex. So there are 4 layers, I think, that we need to protect. And that also leaves out the actor as a layer who is actually doing something. An actor is a person, they're doing something good or bad. We're going to put them to one side for a second. So now what we have, really, if we're being honest, is applications and APIs consumed by devices and users that we don't trust, built by developers that we don't always trust, hosted on systems, you know, that we don't trust, run by other departments within our company, don't always trust them either, run in servers we can't control, but we still need to get the job done. And when an app is hacked and someone downloads millions of records, for example, the developer who built some of the code for the Equifax hack, senior leaders, the market, whatever, they don't go to the developers and get angry. They go to this group of IT leaders. We hold the responsibility. We have to acknowledge, we have to understand that the concept of the perimeter, the hard outer shell, it's gone. We can't get it back. And actually, if we really think about it, it's been gone for quite a long time. We just don't want to admit it. So you've got employees, customers, partners, contractors, but these users start to all look very similar. There isn't a cookie cutter, a boilerplate, a template set of rules you can apply to all of them. What it comes down to is trust. How do you think about trust? How do you figure it out? How do you apply it? How do you revoke it? How do you measure trust? The consequences of getting it wrong are numerous. It's huge, hacks, right? And I could list off 50, 100 hacks in the last 2 years, but getting it right has some real benefits and it makes business better. So on my story through time, we've arrived at a bit of a bleak point where we need to consider what we can do to make it better. And I think there are 4 pillars, 4 ideas, 4 things that I'm going to cover now that are going to, basically, these are how to adapt to this new world. So the first is context and how context relates to security. Context is key. Who is trying to do what, when? When you authenticate into a system, you have context, credentials, username, password, past years of behavior, third-party intelligence, your device, physical network, geolocation. Most companies just throw this all away and they only look at username and password because passwords can never be compromised and all of our usernames aren't our first name and a dot and our last name. It's unbelievably formulaic. Some more advanced thinkers, maybe some people on this call, might apply network context. Is this authentication on or off our network? Are they in an office or are they outside of our office? I'm guessing some people on the call might be doing that, and that's good, but it's still pretty basic. Maybe you have smarter, more intelligent policies. The concept of, I'm not going to talk too much about what multi-factor authentication is, MFA. If you don't know, it's when you get that random text and you have to copy a number across and enter it in. So if anyone's ever heard of the Superman rule, it says, you're not allowed to log in Turkey, where you guys are, and then 15 minutes later, Russia and China, because you couldn't have physically made that journey in 15 minutes. That's a bit more advanced. That's the Superman rule. If we focus on device identity, is this device something that we've seen before? Is it recognized? Is it part of our mobile device management, or MDM? If you, a user or a customer, always connect to the same computer with the same phone, that's interesting to know. If you registered with this device, it's valuable to know. And authentication from these devices, these known and trusted devices, should be a little bit more trusted. Is the device the one that they enroll for MFA factors? Is it part of our managed devices? Just asking these questions improves security. Within devices, you can go a step further. You can look at the applications, the application layer. So if we fingerprint the application, we can see, is this app the app that we released to the App Store, or is it something else? If you're a bank, for example, and you want to know, you will want to know if your customers are using your app, or if they're connecting via APIs through something else. That would be very interesting for me at a bank to know. If we look at the users themselves, their identity, there are certain transactions that are inherently high risk. Take enrollment, for example, when you set up the device or when you set up a multi-factor. That's inherently high risk, as if I can enroll as one of you, I am you, I have that identity. If I attack your account and reset your password, that's a great attack. I now own that account. I have essentially become you. If I can turn off your MFA factors, that's very high risk. In these scenarios, if a user is trying to do one of these things, firstly, your security posture should state whether they can even do it or not. That's one point. But if they are going to do it, they definitely need to answer an MFA challenge to prove that they are actually them. And if they're not, or if they're trying to do something that is deemed to be too secure, we can lock off that device. We can stop this in action. Most users only change their password when it expires. So we've all experienced a password, password rotation policy. After 3 months, you have to change your password. And all we do is, instead of saying Max Fawn 1, we write Max Fawn 2. So that's another problem. But if we take something like a password reset, as an identity provider, as Okta, we know that you've reset your password. We can send signals downstream to all of your sessions. We can revoke those sessions, okay? So that means if you are in something like Salesforce and you do a password reset, we can kill that session. If you change your password because you've been breached and your sessions aren't revoked, if they aren't cancelled, the password may have been reset, but the attacker still has access. You're still breached. It may not be breached from a random identity provider's point of view, but it is from yours. And this is just one directional from the identity provider's perspective. And Okta is an identity provider. There are many out there. What happens when you think about it from the angle of apps? Your app knows behaviorally what you do or don't usually do. If an HR guy accesses pay software at 10 a.m. on a weekday, that's fine. But if the same guy, starts giving raises to people at 2 a.m. in Las Vegas, that's not so fine. There might be a problem there, maybe. Maybe he's quite drunk. They might have authenticated through your identity provider successfully. They've logged on, username and password. And we, the identity provider, don't know what's going on in the app. That's very important. We never will, we never should. But the app can notify us that something's wrong. And we can then force additional factors. We can notify security teams. You might want to check on this. We can mitigate or pause the breach in action. If we're told there's a chance of a breach, we can kill the session. That's pretty powerful. And now if we think about it from a consumer, a customer, a B2C or a CIAM perspective, depending on what you call it. In our industry, we call it many things. If you want to attack someone, or a company actually, you want to attack at user registration, setting username, password, your factor. These are things that a user does, but it turns out a bot can do them very easily too, a robot. We know we at Okta are not experts in bot activity or tracking every hacker in the world. You'd need a company to track bot networks and their usage, and there are those companies. We have partners who do this, and what we can do is pull in third-party data and enrich the context that I'm talking about. It might seem like human behavior to us, but a third party can signal it's likely a bot and will stop it in action. If you can't register in the first place, you can't get access to anything else. I think it's also worth noting that your adoption is an important factor in all of this. Whilst in B2E, your IT for your employees, you can get away with giving your employees a bad experience because some of their work experience has been with legacy technology. Has anyone on this call ever tried pulling up an engineering drawing off of an ERP system? That's the kind of legacy I'm talking about. But younger employees, they grew up with this iPhone I mentioned. When we think about our customers, they're much like our younger employees. Putting any kind of friction in front of them, any kind of, IT as a blocker, it makes them end their sessions. Contextual security, the thing that I'm talking about right now, is fantastic for addressing this, because I bet the people on this call, if they are MFAing people, I bet that there are MFAing employees every single time they log on. But if we have context like it's on the office IP and it's one of our managed devices and it's accessing a system that isn't sensitive, why would we need to MFA them? We can be very confident actually that it is in fact that person, and that and that the system that they're trying to access is not that important. That makes happier employees. If you're doing this in B2C, to your customers, and if you're doing MFA to your customers because you need to provide a layer of security, perhaps because someone is in your e-commerce portal and they are updating payment details, that's important. You might want to MFA them, right? But you could not MFA them when they log on because they're just there to look at some data. They're there to do some shopping. And it's only when they move to the more sensitive area of updating a payment portal, would you then want to consider a step-up authorization, a step-up authentication? Only MFA when you have to. It means your customers are happier. So The first pillar is context. Second pillar is having an open platform. The better we can inform you and create this context, the better the context will be. But that requires the next step. It's an open platform. So I said I wouldn't talk about Okta too much. I have to briefly at this point. Okta's approach to the platform pillar is an identity engine. When Okta, and the reason I bring up Okta is it informs why I'm talking about this. When Okta was founded 10 years ago, it was built on a lot of assumptions, and it focused at that stage around workforce and employee user cases. But since then, it's expanded out to address customer use cases, server access use cases, all sorts of things. So some of the assumptions we made at the beginning, they weren't mapped up, they weren't right for this new world. The identity engine has the ability to override or turn off the defaults in our product. So you have these defaults, they're what you should be doing. You can turn them on and off, you can adjust them. One of the core things that's built into Okta is the acknowledgement, or is our mindset, is the understanding, the acknowledgement that we don't know everything. Our job is to understand trends, protocols, the practices, not to understand your business's inside and out. That's your job. So the identity engine is the ability to take that understanding of your business and plug it into us. So we don't have to figure it all out, you can figure it out. With all of this context and an open platform, a configurable platform, you can use things like event hooks, if anyone's ever heard of these. Something happens in your app or on your network, a user logging in, a user registering, a user logging out, and you can make a webhook out and you can say, here's the context of the event that's just happened. What do you want to do? You can start to do actions, you can process, you can have a logic function, you can talk to further action, you can take further actions. And with inline hooks, you can redirect Okta and tell Okta to do something different than before. If you detect a bot, you can prevent the bot from logging in, even if it's already registered, by using this type of technology. This glue lets you connect everything together. As part of a registration flow, for example, a user, when they sign up, we might hook out to a credit checking agency to provide an additional layer of identity proofing to make sure that registration is in fact the person who it says it is. So the third pillar, on top of context, configurable and open platform, is everything being connected. There is no one vendor, technology, app that ties this all together, regardless of what some people might say. There's no singular way of doing it. It's a strategy. But what we do need is for apps to talk better. We need to accomplish this with open standards and protocols. So, OIDC, OAuth, those types of things. On the subject of interconnection, we, the identity provider, normally know about things before they've happened. We know when hacking groups have released a new data set, for example. We can go ahead and take additional actions like forcing a password reset or revoking tokens. We know you are high risk now for this particular event, but that doesn't mean you're going to be high risk forever. Trust is earned back and we have to measure it. So the last thing is the network effect, the last pillar. The more apps that are communicating more effectively, the better it is. So far, I've spoken about our network, our devices, things like that, or even our customers actually, or partners, or subcontractors. How many attacks actually come straight to us? And how many attacks come via someone else? So a great example of this is a subcontractor, someone who works for your company but isn't actually a full-time employee. If anyone here has heard of the brand Target, it's a very big department store in the States. They had a massive breach recently. The way in which the attacker got in is via, it's an HVAC system, but what that means is air conditioning. That Target had outsourced the temperature control of their retail outlets, of their shops, to a company, and that company was logging on to Target's corporate network to check the temperature readings in different bits of the shop to make sure they were doing a good job. So the attacker logged on as the partner and got access to Target and then downloaded all of Target's customer records, because when they were inside the network, they were trusted because they'd got past the hard outer perimeter of a firewall or a username and a password. So we need to think about attacker behavior, not just as our own network and security. The odds are when an attacker comes along, They didn't come straight to us. They actually attacked our competitors, our customers, our vendors, a supplier. With this network effect of knowledge, we can connect to all of this stuff and have like a neighborhood watch, but on a global scale. We've got a great example of doing this. We defended against a state level attack where one state was attacking another state's critical infrastructure. Now, all of the critical infrastructure of that state actually was compromised and went down, apart from the one thing, in this case it was the airport, that was being secured by Okta. Through this technology that I'm talking about now, we had spotted that this attacking state was attacking lots of different things, and we proactively started to lock down that IP address and the mirrors that popped up, so they weren't able to attack our clients. I think it's worth noting that when did this happen? You know, this happened at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. So Okta programmatically stopped this, but I would say if you're doing it yourself, because you're not adopting a zero trust mindset, a zero trust strategy, are your IT team working at midnight on New Year's Eve, midnight on a public holiday? Probably not. And if they are, it's one person. Could that one person defend against an entire state? Interesting question. It also raises another point, which is when you do a deployment of a traditional on-prem software, because each deployment is entirely silo, it's custom, it's for you, you don't have the ability to look at all of the other deployments across the world and to take data. So you don't have the ability to do things like this. I think in summary or in ending, you know, we can adapt and change our security posture, and we should adapt and change our security posture, because we now have more and more data, more and more context, and not just our own context, but global context. If something is under attack, or if someone is under attack in a different part of the network, we can adapt. We can be proactive instead of reactive, and we can protect our users before there's even a threat, because there is always going to be a threat. At the moment, I think I've spoken for about 25 minutes, maybe 30. I think I'm now to take some questions, so I'll hand back over to our hosts.
Thank you very much, Max. We have a couple of questions. First question, does Okta cloud-only solution or does have on-prem also?
Great question. So this is actually a very important thing, and you can tell, right? I'd love to go and talk about the whole speech just on this. Okta is born and engineered in the cloud. Okay, so it's cloud first. I think this is really important because if we take another example, and I've got to be a bit careful because this is being recorded, but you take someone like a large on-prem identity provider that now has a cloud or a SaaS-based offering. It's really important to differentiate between something that is engineered with modern technology, modern code, modern standards, modern thinking in the cloud, and someone who is taking old ways of thinking, old protocols, old network security, wrapping it up, and then porting it to the cloud. Because if you look at the top 10 vulnerabilities, if you Google just top 10 IT vulnerabilities in like global corporate IT, it's the same vendors that are always in the top 10, and it's because they're doing this. So with Okta being cloud first, you know, we were engineered specifically to solve this cloud problem. Saying that, there is an understanding that not every business in the world is ready for the future that I'm talking about, and that some of them have lots and lots and lots of older apps, maybe on-premise using header-based auth, that they are not ready to migrate to the cloud. They're not ready to package and move it. They're not ready to buy a SaaS app instead. With that in mind, Okta has something called the OAG, the Okta Access Gateway. And the Okta Access Gateway gives you the ability to give all of this modern identity I've spoken about to the older on-prem stuff. So when you use the OAG module specifically, obviously, to talk to an on-prem app, you will need an on-prem server. That is the on-prem aspect of Okta. But you know, that's if you want to do that thing. If you don't want to do that thing, everything else is just fully cloud.
Thank you. Next question about integration. Can you tell about more detail about integration? Which solutions can you integrate?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. Very relevant to Okta, actually. So integrations, to me personally, not to me personally, to your business, I don't know. They're like three different levels of integration, right? You have SSO or federation, then you have lifecycle management or provisioning, and then lastly, you have as a master. Now, Okta's integration, we call it the Okta Integration Network. Other companies might call it an app gallery. A lot of companies won't have any pre-built integrations at all, and they'll just be offering a wizard, or even worse, just code it yourself. When we think about our integration network, we have 6,500 applications pre-built for SSO and federation. So that means,
sorry, 6,500. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
6,500 apps pre-built. What that means is when you plug in your corporate IT, it is highly likely that your main apps, that another client will have had those apps, and that you will just turn it on. There is no coding, right? Now compare that to the old world where you would build out federation to a given app, then you would have to maintain it. And people forget that it probably takes, not a huge amount, probably like 20 hours over the course of a year just to keep one of these links, these integrations live. 20 hours a year, but you've got 100 apps, most businesses do. Hold on a sec, we're getting to the point where it's actually a big part of someone's job to do this work. With Okta, we would be managing that. That's SSO, that's federation, right? Then we move to provisioning, to lifecycle management. I kind of think of this a bit like SSO or federation is like a path. It's very thin, easy. When we move to lifecycle management or provisioning, the actions we're trying to take in the app are far more complex. So I think of this like a road. It takes a lot more effort to build a road than it does to build a path. To build a path, you just walk it. To build a road, trucks, cement, tarmac, whatever it is, planning, right? So to build an SSO integration, it's not, maybe if you really know what you're doing, somewhere between 5 and 10 hours. To build a provisioning integration, a lifecycle management integration, it's probably 1 to 2 months. The equivalent is probably 25, or if it's complex, $50,000 to build this type of thing. Okta has 130 of these pre-built for the most popular apps that you would want to do this for. So think like Salesforce or Box or Slack or Microsoft O365 or any of these, right? So this is lifecycle management. Then you've got the last one, which is as a master. This is like, my analogy is a river. This is very complex, very hard to build. Very, very few people are able to support this. Okta supports 13 as a master pre-built integrations. Now, what that means is that if you've got, let's take Workday as your HR system, instead of managing your identities from Active Directory, because that's where you think you manage them, you don't. They start in your HR system because that's the first system that knows when an employee joins, moves, or leaves, most importantly. We can flow that automated out across the entire system. So that's an as a master integration. Those integrations, horrifically complex. If you're trying to do this in what's a very common environment, Microsoft, you would need Microsoft MIM, or the older guys among us might call it FIM. A FIM or a MIM deployment is 10 to 18 months, depending on your organizational size. It's going to cost you $200,000 to $350,000 to implement it. You're going to need 6 machines, be it on-prem or virtualized, to run it. You're going to need most of a person just to administer this platform. And then lastly, every single app you integrate is going to cost you $50K in terms of time and effort. So that's the alternative. And if we just take a step back, I've spoken about integrations that we offer. 6,500 for SSO, 120, I think 130 for provisioning, and I believe it's somewhere like 13 for as a master. These numbers increase every day because as customers, as our clients add things to our network, the network effect grows. There is a further, I would just note, we are twice the nearest vendor for SSO. We are 4 times the nearest vendor for lifecycle management. And we are 10 to 13 times the nearest vendor for as a master. So there is only one other vendor that's really doing this. They've got 1. We have 13 times for the most common things you would want to use. And then Okta has recently released a product about 4 months ago called Workflows. It's fantastic. And if you were to ask me, Max, what do you think is going to change the game for Okta. What is the big deal? Is that workflows is a graphical user interface where a non-technical user can drag and drop like events, like different things and triggers, and you can basically create some business logic so that what you can do is you can create provisioning, deprovisioning, and even license revocation capability without actually coding at all. So if we were already in the lead from a coding perspective because we pre-built all this stuff, now you've got workflows. You can do all that stuff now to any app that accepts APIs and webhooks without any code at all. That's an integration network, yeah.
Fantastic. You mean, for example, I have an in-house developed cloud product, and I can easily integrate with using those modules.
Assuming, okay, so there's a little bit of complexity to that. So you built it yourself, okay?
Yes.
If you built it on a modern standard, then yes, 100% very easy. If you haven't built it on a modern standard, but you have coded it in such a way that you can accept API calls or webhooks, which most people would be doing now, by the way, then yes, again. If your app is very, very custom and very, very old, it's not a SaaS app, it's just an on-prem app, but it uses header-based auth, Okta Access Gateway can talk to that as well. So there are many different ways we can solve it.
Okay, thank you. One more question.
Sure.
You have an directory service also, am I right?
Can you say that again, sorry?
Directory server.
Yes.
Service.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about this directory service?
Great question. So the directory aspects of what we do, I personally think, put it this way, you probably gather from my title, I'm a consultant. I talk to senior leaders about the impact of technology. The directory aspect of what Okta does is normally the biggest business impact. So in IT, we worry a lot about many different things. We often forget what it means to a business. The directory bit is the bit that actually addresses this. Okta's universal directory, just think of a meta directory. What it's doing is actually incredibly cool, and it was the first bit of our product, and it was really what created Okta. It was the massive growth that you saw was because of this bit of technology. So we talk about everything else now. This is really, the thing that's powering it beneath the scenes. In the current world, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think everyone might be experiencing. You have, let's be honest, it's Active Directory. It's very uncommon. There's a bit of LDAP going on. There's a couple of other things, but it's very uncommon for companies not to have Active Directory. And they have Active Directory and it sits in forests. So what usually happens is businesses grow over time. They buy other businesses, or they create business lines, or they have random teams in the middle of nowhere, and they have different Active Directories, and they're all over the place, and they don't talk to each other. So to get them to talk, you need to do what's called a domain consolidation or a domain trust project. I'm sure that some people on this webinar will have gone through one of these. They are, best case scenario, 3-month projects for 3 people. For a big company, it's a lot worse. So to do a domain consolidation or a domain trust, you do this big bit of work, you probably get a consultancy in to do it or some contractors. And then with that, you then have your single directory, right, your single forest. And that way you can use an identity vendor to master from that thing, right? So that's an as a master integration to one Active Directory. Okta is completely different. So what we would do in this scenario, loads of different Active Directory forests all over the world, all over a country or in different businesses, is you don't need to do any of that work. And by the way, this is very applicable to a merger and acquisition scenario as well. You don't need to do any of that work. You drop on our domain agent, which is a 5 megabyte executable. It takes about 15 minutes in total because I've done it myself. And essentially what that will do is that will take all the data in all the directories and it will read write up to Okta. It will sync to Okta. And on the way in, you can do things like data sanitization, like making sure that there aren't duplicates. You can also change the data. You can transform it on the way in, because one of your directories might be first name dot last name, and another directory might be last name dot first name. Microsoft would just implode if that happened. Whereas Okta, we can use something called expression language to very simply flip things around to change the way that things are. So by syncing in real time all of these directories, you don't need to do a domain consolidation, you don't need to do a domain trust, You don't need to worry about how to integrate a domain after you've done a merger or an acquisition or a spin-off. It's already in our universal directory. So this bit of our product, our directory services, you know, it saves businesses 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 million dollars. You know, for a big business I'm talking about. It is incredibly cool. And I would go a step further and just note that what I'm really talking about is multi-mastering. Other products don't multi-master, they single master, and that's why you have to do these projects. We also have the same approach with an HR system. So you don't need to come with one HR system, you can bring the whole lot, and we'll just multi-master from all of them, instead of just only looking at one and forcing you to pick just one.
Thank you very much. The last question about licensing.
Yes.
Tell me about something about licensing, how you're based.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, just as to be overt or to be upfront, I don't do any aspect of licensing or commercial or price. I specifically exist in the, is the technology right? Is this,
okay.
Well, saying that, Okta prices licenses like any modern SaaS company. So it's usually, you know, in an external sense, it's a monthly active user. I think that this is very good. I think this is better than the old way, because in the old way, for example, we would have something like a perpetual license, and then we might have an ongoing support cost, and then we would also have, you know, like a registered user cost. So take a B2C scenario, like let's say you are a company like a cinema, and you have a customer portal, and everyone registers in, and your old licensing cost, the old way of doing it, was every single person that registers, you pay a fee for. Great. Well, it's not great, because 90% of them haven't logged on this year because they've only been to the cinema once. With Okta, if they log on once in a month, that's, yeah, you bill for that. But if they don't log on for the other 11 months of the year, there's no bill. It only bills about what you use, because if we're being honest with each other, that's actually how the technology behind thinks about things. You know, it's all about utilization of servers. That's what we're really thinking about. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, that's all. There is no other question in my list. Thank you very much, Max.
Great. Thank you very much.
Us.
One last before we sign off.
Okay.
I know I said that I wouldn't talk too much about Okta, and I'm not going to, right? So I've talked a bit in the Q&A section about Okta, but my main speech wasn't specifically about Okta. I just want to note, because not everyone will have the familiarity with Okta that perhaps I do and some people on this call do. Every single capability I spoke about in my keynote speech is an Okta thing. So none of that is all right now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Please add me on LinkedIn if you want to discuss this stuff further.
Okay, thank you very much. Teşekkür ediyoruz katılımınız için. Kaydedilecek bu session ve zannediyorum en geç yarın YouTube kanalımıza yayınlayacağız. Katılımcıların tamamına bu linki göndereceğiz. Teşekkür ediyoruz tekrar. İyi günler diliyoruz.